Look at this mist. It is summer. It is 1955, and this mist is progress. The government was protecting these children. Doctors approved. Scientists guaranteed. The Nobel Prize had been awarded for it 7 years before. This chemical is still in the bodies of those children today, and in the bodies of their children and their grandchildren. Not because it stayed in the environment, because it never left the blood. In 1939, a Swiss chemist discovered something extraordinary. A simple molecule, cheap, stable, that killed insects with an efficiency never seen before. During World War II, American soldiers were sprayed with DDT to kill lice. In occupied Italy, military health teams entered homes, sprayed walls, clothing, children, and malaria retreated. It was a miracle, literally called that. In 1948, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded, and the world accelerated. DDT was added to wallpaper, to house paint, to children's shampoo. Planes flew over entire forests and entire cities, releasing the white mist. Trucks circulated through residential neighborhoods while families ate dinner with the windows open. Life magazine published a photo that would become iconic, a truck covering a New York beach with DDT while children played in the mist. The caption said that DDT had stopped a typhus epidemic in Naples. No one mentioned what the mist would do to the children, because there was no reason to mention it. Science had spoken. The case was closed. On an island in Maine, a woman watched the ocean. Rachel Carson was 50 years old and had dedicated her life to a single project, making the common world understand the invisible web that connects all living things. She was not an activist. She was a marine biologist, a writer. Her books about the ocean had spent 86 weeks on the bestseller list. In January 1958, a letter arrived from a friend in Massachusetts. The birds had died. Not some, all of them. Carson had already noticed similar things. She began pulling the threads. Robins found dead beneath elm trees treated with DDT in Michigan. Bald eagles with eggshells so thin they broke under the weight of the mother. Reports of dead fish in rivers near sprayed farmland. DDT did not disappear. It accumulated. It entered the insect, went to the bird that ate the insect. At each step in the food chain, the concentration multiplied. What was a trace in the insect became a lethal dose in the falcon. It was a silent and invisible amplification moving through the entire web of life. And the human being was at the top of that chain. No one had asked what happened to the human being. Carson begins writing in 1958. The project consumes 4 years. She interviews scientists, reads studies, consults pathologists, visits devastated fields. The final manuscript would have 55 pages of scientific references, every claim verified, every piece of data traceable. In 1960, a discovery during a routine examination, a lump. The doctor did not give her much time. She kept writing. She kept the diagnosis almost entirely secret, not out of fear, but strategy. She knew what the chemical industry would do with the information. A woman with cancer writing about poisons, the narrative would write itself against her. So she worked, with her bones aching, her vision compromised, her hands sometimes too weak to hold the pen. In June 1962, the editor of The New Yorker read the manuscript. He called that same afternoon. He wanted to serialize it in the summer. On June 16, 1962, Silent Spring reached American readers for the first time. Before the book was published in print in September, the chemical industry had already declared war. Monsanto did not wait to read the whole book. It distributed a parody of Silent Spring to journalists, editors, and politicians before the official publication. Chemist Robert White Stevens appeared on national television in a white laboratory coat. He called Carson a fanatic defender of the cult of the balance of nature. He said that her ideas, if accepted, would return humanity to the Dark Ages. The former Secretary of Agriculture wrote to the president with a question he considered rhetorical. Why does a spinster with no children care so much about genetics? He added that she probably sympathized with the communists. The industry spent the equivalent of millions of dollars trying to destroy not the argument, but the woman. It was the same playbook the tobacco industry had developed a decade before. An internal memo described it with chilling clarity. Doubt is our product. Not to refute the science, to fund enough doubt to paralyze action. But this time, the science was more solid than the campaign had calculated. Washington, D.C., June 4, 1963. Room 102 of the new Senate office building. Small, windowless, packed with reporters. Rachel Carson entered the room with careful steps. The cancer had reached her bones. Walking was an effort she did not let show. She wore a wig. No one in the Senate knew. She arranged her index cards, tested the microphone, looked at the senators, and then she spoke for 90 minutes with the calm of someone who has nothing left to lose, and with the precision of someone who spent 4 years building an unassailable argument. She did not ask for the ban of DDT. She asked for something harder, that the government require science to answer the questions no one had asked before releasing these chemicals into the world. The problem you have chosen to explore, she said, is one that must be resolved in our time. 2 months before, President Kennedy's Science Advisory Committee had published its report. It validated Carson's conclusions. Compared to Dr. White Stevens, who had appeared on TV in a white lab coat shouting about the cult of nature, Carson in the Senate looked exactly like what she was, a scientist. The industry had miscalculated. By attacking her, it had transformed the issue into something the public could understand clearly. On one side, a woman with data. On the other, companies with money. Rachel Carson died on April 14, 1964. It was spring. She was 56 years old. The book was not yet 2 years old. She did not see what would come. In 1970, 10 million people took to the streets on the first Earth Day in history. The United States Environmental Protection Agency was created that same year. In 1972, DDT was banned in the United States. She saw none of it. But what she could not see goes beyond the victory. DDT is still produced, still used in low-income countries as a tool against malaria. And the effects on populations exposed decades ago are still being discovered. Studies published in 2024 found evidence that DDT exposure during pregnancy affects not only the children, but the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. A chemical inheritance transmitted across generations in fatty tissue and epigenetic code. And the playbook that tried to silence Carson? It survived far better than the birds. The same strategy, fund doubt, attack the scientist, not the science, was used later by the lead industry, by the sugar industry, by the oil industry. Doubt is our product was not a confession, it was a manual. And it is still in use. In 1955, those children running in the mist were proof that science had conquered nature. No one asked what the mist would do to them in 50 years, because science had spoken. The case was closed. Rachel Carson did the only thing any scientist can do when the case is closed too soon. She reopened it. There is always a moment before we knew. This is before we knew.